And we are going to continue to dive into the talks that we've had around the kingdom of heaven. And we've been going through a series called Kingdom Come. And we started the first week with just defining what the kingdom is. That the kingdom is the rule and reign of Creator God, of Yahweh, in the here and now, embodied in the person of Jesus. That he brought the kingdom of heaven, and that the kingdom of heaven, the rule and reign of God, affects our here and our now. Right, and then last week we talked about kind of a definition of what it looked like for Jesus to proclaim the kingdom of heaven. Jesus went all throughout the area and he was proclaiming that the kingdom of heaven has come. That was the good news. That the kingdom has come. It is at hand. It is so close it's like you could reach through this veil and you could grab a piece of it. Right? But then it didn't stop at a message. It didn't just stop with a declaration about the kingdom. It was always married, it was always partnered and intertwined with a demonstration of the kingdom. So the kingdom doesn't only come in declaration, it also comes in demonstration. And then Jesus sent out his disciples, he sent out his followers, first the 12, and then the 72 to do the things he had been doing. And that's where we come in, right? We are the followers of Jesus, and we have been sent along with the sent ones. We are a sent people to proclaim the good news and to demonstrate the kingdom power. That's where we left it. Now, that sounds good, but there is a danger in it. Right there, this is the danger. The danger is that we can become very frantic and very busy with trying to do the things of the kingdom. That we forget something. We don't do the things of the kingdom. We don't do the things of the kingdom. Let me back up a little bit. We're going to dive into that. So a lot of people have been very caring for us since we've been here. We've been extremely excited to be a part of this family. A number of you have asked how you could pray for me specifically and for our family. And one of the things that I always bring up is I need the ability to focus. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about the ability to focus on work. I actually can focus on work pretty well. I'm pretty good at focusing on work. If anything, maybe I'm too good at focusing on work. What I'm actually looking for the ability to do is to not focus on work, but to focus on the other things that are important in my life. And maybe you can identify with this, but it's entirely possible for me to be physically present with my family, but a million miles away in my mind. Right? Now that's not a great thing. That's not me. That's not a humble brag. I can be physically present with my family, but I can be a million miles away, and sometimes that involves work. You see, I get spinning in my mind, and the gears don't shut off, and they just spin and spin and spin and spin and spin, and what it does is it robs my family from space and time. Another thing that it does is it actually causes like wear and tear on me emotionally and physically, and I just get fatigued and I get tired. And then I look back at it and I get really frustrated because I've been spinning the gears of my mind, but I didn't actually do anything. Have you ever found yourself in the place where you're busy and frantic and there's chaos in your life, but there's actually no outcomes? Like the work that you've been doing doesn't actually produce anything. There's an appearance of life. It looks good. It looks busy. We actually pride ourselves on our busyness. I love it when I talk to people, especially in ministry, but it's not limited to that. And you say, "How are you doing?" And they're like, "I'm so busy." Like it's some kind of brag that they have going on. Like this busyness and this chaos of life is what we're after. But the problem is, we aren't called to busyness. And there's a difference between busyness and outcomes. And this isn't just about like the church. But I do think the church has gotten really, really good at being busy. It's entirely possible that you can be busy with church activities, whether that's small groups or children's ministry or youth ministry or whatever label you want to put on that program. You can be involved in church programs 5 or 6 days a week. We've been really good at this for decades. You can be busy in the church. Yet the church in America is in decline. We have had an appearance of life, and it's been marked by busyness, and it's been marked by frantic activity, yet we're in decline because we actually don't have good outcomes. The outcome of our busyness is actually not life, it's decline and death. Now, there's something wrong there. And it's not just in us. I think it's actually representative of the culture that we live in. We live in a culture of busyness and chaos. And again, it's like I'm busy is a mark of pride. And we're all busy. Yet mental health has never been more degraded in America than it is right now. It has never been at an all-time low with anxiety and depressive symptoms at an all-time high. This is what busyness gets us. There's an appearance of life, but there isn't truly life. We want to pay attention to this. Now, there was an experiment that I find just absolutely fascinating. It was done from Microsoft offices in Japan. Now, Japan is like kind of notorious for being a culture of overwork. In fact, at one time, they tried to go to an 8-day week instead of a 7-day week, so that they could have one more day of work, right? And just as you might assume from looking at our statistics in America, it was even more exaggerated in Japan. So anxiety and depression and suicide levels were at an all-time high when they did the 8-day work week. And Microsoft Japan kind of looked at everything that had happened in the past with that and where they were with their company, and they said, well, what if we try the opposite of that? What if instead of increasing the amount of time we work, what if we decrease the amount of time we work? Because what they were really looking for is they were looking for productivity, because they understood there's a difference between being busy and being productive. There's a difference between activity and outcomes. And so they looked at that and they said, okay, well, what can we adjust? And so they started shortening the amount of time they spent in meetings, both in the length of the meeting itself and how many meetings they had. They reduced who needed to be in each of those meetings until it was only the absolutely essential people that were in those meetings. And so they had a cap on meetings of an hour tops. Okay, and then they reduced it to the amount of people that actually needed to be in there, and then they eliminated the other meetings that they felt like maybe these have just gotten a little bit out of control. And so they reduced all of that, and they still paid their employees for a 5-day work week, but they worked a 4-day work week. They got paid for full time, but they worked 32 hours a week. All right, so it wasn't like 4 10-hour days, it wasn't like 4 12-hour days, we're just making it up somewhere else. This was legitimately a shortened work week. You want to know what happened? You do, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right. So their productivity, by decreasing 8 hours of work a week, their productivity went up 40%. Isn't that insane? Like, wouldn't you like to have better outcomes in your life by doing less? Like, there's the old adage that less is more, but in this case, it's absolutely true. A 4-day work week produced 40% more productivity. Now, that covers all sorts of things like it covers the amount of time that lights were on in the building, right? So you have your overhead of the building and your facility usage and care and the wear and tear. All of that plays into that. What also played into it, though, was the health and the well-being of the workers themselves, the employees. It went up. Morale went up. And so they were doing more because they were working from a place of rest and not a place of burnout and stress. And so the quality of the work they were producing went up, but also the quality of life of the individuals went up. And so Microsoft Japan was saving on healthcare costs related to their employees. Right? It's all just wrapped together, and they realized something, that there is a difference between busyness and outcomes. I think there's a lesson for us in this story. It's one of my favorite studies that has ever been done, because if I'm being honest, as much as I like to work, there's a part of me that's always like trying to figure out how to do less. Like, there's just that slightly lazy piece of me that's like, how can I get around this? And I'm like, Microsoft Japan, you're brilliant. You've done it. But there's a lesson beyond just working less. There's a lesson that there's a difference between being busy and having the appearance of life and actually having life-giving output. So the question is, how do we cultivate that in our life? How do we cultivate this life, and not just the appearance of life, but actual life? And as we're talking about the kingdom of heaven, how do we cultivate a presence of the kingdom in our own life and not just the appearance of the kingdom? Right? Because the church has had an appearance of the kingdom. We've had an appearance of busyness. We've had an appearance of life, but I'm not always sure it's actually the kingdom that's being brought in us. I started this out by saying we don't actually produce the kingdom, but we do cultivate the kingdom. we can cultivate a life, a lifestyle, a way of life that actually is conducive to kingdom growth and kingdom presence. Kingdom being the rule and reign of God, we can cultivate that in our own life. In order to do that, I want to invite you to turn to Matthew chapter 13. We're going to visit a pretty popular parable from Jesus. Again, it's going to be up front if you need to follow along that way. But Matthew 13, we're going to start at verse 3, and this is Jesus teaching. He's teaching in parables. Parables served a lot of functions. So you may have heard that it said that a parable is just a nice picture, word picture to go along with a lesson, but that's not it. Actually, Jesus also used parables to hide meaning it had to be mined out, meaning if you heard it and you were hungry for it, you would be more hungry for it by digging for it. You would mine out the truth, you'd mine out the gold of it, and you would search for it. So Jesus often talked in parables also to see who the hungry were, to see who were actually hearing. That's why after so many parables you hear, those who have ears to hear should hear. It's not just like hearing the words that Jesus said, it's responding to the words that Jesus said. It's going deeper. And so we're going to see in this parable also the disciples exhibit that. So let's start in verse 3. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But then the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop to 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. And here's that phrase, whoever has ears, let them hear. Okay, so we're going to skip down. We're going to skip this explanation of Jesus. Really, he's talking about parables, but he's also speaking in response to the disciples who are like, hey, I don't really understand that. Help me understand what you just said. And so Jesus gives them an explanation. And this is rare because we don't always get an explanation of the parables. So verse 18, listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed that was sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word of God and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop, yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through soil by soil, and we're going to figure out, and we're going to notice a few differences in the soils. And in the first soil, we learn a lot. Beyond just what happens to the seed. So Jesus says, listen, this is what the parable means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed that falls along the path. Now, imagine the path. We were in the Roman world at the time, and Rome was known for their roads. So it could very well be possible that Jesus is speaking on a paved path, right? Roads that were paved by the Romans that still exist and can be walked on today. They're doing a little better of a job at their road work than maybe we are. But so Jesus could be speaking on that, or he could just be talking about a really compacted path as that was used as a road, right? Now, I don't know if you guys have them, but in Michigan, we have a lot of dirt roads. That's how country we are in West Michigan, right? So we have a lot of dirt roads, and you can tell who lives on a dirt road because their big pickup truck goes by, and it's just caked in dirt, right? And you know, oh, that person didn't just drive on a dirt road. That person's living on the dirt road. And the fascinating thing about the dirt roads is once they've been graded and all the potholes have been filled in, it's so compact that, like, if you're on a well-graded dirt road, it's like driving on a regular road. It's so firm, so compact. There's no aeration in that soil whatsoever. It is just hard. And so whether Jesus is talking about like a paved path or just a really compact path, the point is the same. There is no way for the seed that is scattered on that path to ever be received by the soil. It's just not going to happen. And so what you're left with is you're left with a gigantic dinner plate for birds. Right? So you have the seed that goes out there and the birds are picking it away. And Jesus says that's the representation of the enemy, the devil, that works by deceiving people and stealing away the message. Now, I don't know if this is true, but my assumption and my understanding of this passage is that there's kind of a progressional thing going on here with all the soils, that the sower's probably not walking down the path and sowing on the path intentionally. He knows that the seed that's sown on the path, it's not producing anything. Like, it's not going anywhere. So there's something else that happens. The sower is sowing from the place of the good soil, and some scatters. Probably the least amount of seed is being sown on the path, but still some falls and the enemy steals it away. And there are people around us, there are people, maybe we have even been there ourselves, that have been that kind of hard and compact soil. We were resistant to the message. And so if the seed, what we learn here is that the seed is the message of the kingdom, and now that's both the declaration of the message and the demonstration of the message of the kingdom is represented in the seed being sown. And some of it falls on people that are represented here by the path. And these are people that don't understand it. Maybe they hear it and they're taking it in with their ears, but they just don't have that place. They don't have space within the soil of their lives to be able to receive the seed. And before anything can happen with it, the seed is stolen away by the enemy's deceit. Now, I don't know if this is all-encompassing, but I do know we've been talking a lot about our culture, about a digital Babylon, a culture around us that is incredibly effective at discipling, and primarily through the screens that we hold and that we affix our eyes to. And digital Babylon has been incredibly fruitful in their discipleship. And one of the byproducts that we talked about of their discipleship was a crisis of authority. And a crisis of authority leads to a skeptical culture. So because we always have instant access at our fingertips, we can fact check one another, and my facts don't always line up with your facts. They both seem like they're from credible sources, so who is right? And we start to breed this skepticism between us. Right? That's the effect of digital Babylon. And I believe that the enemy is incredibly excited by this because it just gives him more fodder to work with. He can thrive in a skeptical culture. He really can. Because the skepticism is just part of the sowing. It's part of the deception and part of the stealing away of the message of the kingdom. Because now we have a message that goes out, but it's falling on an increasingly skeptical culture. We're casting more and more seed onto hard paths because of a skeptical culture. But that's just the first soil. Right? So the soil represents people who can hear, but they don't receive. We go on to the second one. Soil number 2. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. All right, so we have the packed path, we have the road, and then as the sower is scattering, maybe a little bit more than on the road, more seed is scattered on maybe the shoulders of the path. So it's still a little bit walked on. There's probably larger stones that have just been kicked off the road and off to the side. And what it does is it allows for the seed to be hidden from birds being able to steal it, but not actually in good soil yet. And so what happens is we have the message that is hidden away, but then springs up, and we have this appearance of life. We have this massive, quick growth, but there is no root. And so when the sun rises, this fragile little plant that needs to be nurtured and hidden and needs to develop a root system is unable to do so, and it withers in the heat of the sun. Again, this is where we start to find some of the pieces being put together. This soil is the first one that seems to have an appearance of life. Now, it would be very easy to look at this and say, people that receive the word and they maybe have this quick growth in response to the word, but they have no root, like they probably weren't really following Jesus to begin with. And it's very easy to look at people that are represented by soil 2 and think, we would never, ever really experience a whole lot of that. They're probably not going to be people that are coming into the church. But I want to argue today that probably soil 2 and soil 3 are what fill our churches most. In fact, we live in a culture that is incredibly receptive to soil 2 type of people. At one time, it was referred to as your 15 minutes of fame. Everybody's looking for their 15 minutes of fame. Now everybody's looking to go viral. If I could just have the viral post, the viral meme, or the viral video, right? And it could just circulate really quick, but what happens with that? It's here today, and it is gone tomorrow. It's like this massive, quick growth, and we're excited about it. It just springs up out of nowhere, and then tomorrow it's gone because somebody finds the next new shiny thing. Even in churches, we like this. We celebrate it. We measure the number of churches as the fastest growing churches in America. There's a whole list, the top 100 fastest growing churches in America. And if you submit your numbers, you can be put on that, and it becomes a thing of pride for pastors. I pastor the, X largest, fastest growing church in America in 2020. It becomes this badge of pride. We really, really like this fast growth, and we've gotten incredibly good at attracting crowds. In fact, I would say over the last 30 years, the American church has been about really fostering this soil 2 type growth. We've been ecstatic to be the ones in the limelight for just a season, and it's given us the appearance of life. But there isn't life there. Let's go on to soil 3. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. So we have the sower casting seed. A little bit goes on the path, maybe a little bit more on the shoulder of the path, even more so in the uncultivated stretch of soil right next to the path. We're not in the good soil yet. We're in between the hard pack and the good soil. And right in there is this uncultivated, potentially good soil. And it's in this soil that the seed falls and the plant, the message of the kingdom springs up, and it looks like it has life, but guess what? That soil has been unattended, it's been uncultivated, and so not only is it a good place to foster growth for the kingdom message, it's also a good place to foster growth for any other care and concern in our life. There isn't time and attention and care given to cultivate the seed that is the message, the declaration and the demonstration of the kingdom. It's a soil that is busy and active, but it's not one that is selective about what it cultivates. It just allows anything to grow. Jesus marks it here by the worries of life and the deceitfulness of wealth, and they choke out the message of the kingdom. You know, what's interesting is I'm not sure a whole lot has changed for us since Jesus' time when it comes to this particular soil. We are still concerned with the worries of this life. Jesus marked it out in other places by what we will eat and what we will drink. And while that may be some concern for some of us, I think most of us are thinking, well, what about my social status? What about my job? What about my next promotion? What about this kind of upward mobility within my profession? How do I give my kids the best that they can have? And how do I have pleasure in what I want to have pleasure? How do I get that next vacation? You could fill in the blank. We had talked a while ago about our if I could just statements. Like where we fill in the blank of that if I could just, that's usually where our hope lies. And those are the worries and the concerns of this life. And the deceitfulness of wealth, we've talked about, I'm sure you've heard about wealth teachings in the gospel before. Jesus talked a lot about money. The truth is, it doesn't matter how you cut it, doesn't matter how you slice it, there is a deceitfulness of wealth. And before you know it, it starts to pull the strings of your life, and it starts to make the calls for your life rather than you making the calls for your money. I've seen it in churches before. We follow the money, and I'll be good with them. Don't rattle the boat over there. They're a good giver. And we follow the money. And in doing so, we choke out the message of the kingdom. We have to pay attention to the soil of our own life. We're getting to soil 4, so let's go there. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop, yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. So just side note, it really bothers me that Jesus doesn't say 30, 60, or 100 times. I don't know why it bothers me so much, but that's totally the wrong way. So we're going to say yielding a crop, some 30, some 60, or some 100. Can we do that? Good, thank you. So we get to the good soil, we get to the soil number 4, and what happens in soil number 4? It's probably the majority of the seed that Jesus sows, and it is cultivated, it is not compact. It's been given space, it's been tilled, and it is rich, and it is good, and it is a place that can foster the tender shoot of the plant that springs up out of the kingdom message seed. Now, at this point, just the tender shoot, we are actually no different than soil 2 and 3. So what makes the difference? Here's the difference. One produces a crop, and one just looks like growth. 2 of the soils have an appearance of growth. They look like they're growing. The seed is legitimately growing, but only one actually produces any crop. Only one actually has fruit in it. The others were busy. In fact, soil 3 could arguably be busier soil than soil 4. It's not just producing the seed that was sown, it's growing up but not producing anything. It's also producing thorns and briars and all sorts of weeds, but it's only soil 4 that may have actually less in it but is producing a crop. And not just any crop. The words Jesus uses here signify that the crop of the kingdom in a well-tilled life is disproportionate to what was sown. One seed bearing up to 100 times more. Jesus' hearers would have, in an agrarian society, would have heard that and been like, that is astonishing. I would kill for that kind of crop. And he said, this is the way it is with the kingdom. And here's the truth, and here's what we're going to find out of this passage. That we are not the seed. We are not the plant, and we are not the crop. You and I are the soil. That's pretty clear here. You and I are the soil. We don't make the crop happen. We don't grow the seed. We don't produce fruit. The kingdom produces fruit, but it only produces fruit in a life that is toiled and attentive to the message of the kingdom. So I'm asking us today to turn our attention to the soil of our lives. Because it is possible to have growth in our life. We live in a growth-obsessed culture. Growth is good. Like, growth has its place, and it is very good, but we are all consumed with growing. But it's possible to grow and to grow and to grow and have an appearance of life, but never produce a crop. It is possible to be soil 2 and see that growth and say, look, I'm growing. But then as soon as the slightest provocation, the slightest adversity comes up against us, our faith falls away. And on a side note, I want to let us know that what's happening in our country right now is not adversity. It's different, and it may be hard for us, but it is not yet adversity. And that might be hard for some of us to hear because we feel like we're being persecuted, but there has been no persecution yet. Not yet. It's different. We have to adapt. But we won't even know yet if we are soil 2. We may not know yet if we're soil 3. In fact, I love this quote that has stuck out to me for a while from Francis Chan. It was in his book, Crazy Love. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't really like the rest of the book, but I absolutely loved this quote. And so I'm going to share the quote with you. You can leave it up to yourself if you want to read the rest of the book. But he says this in Crazy Love: "My caution to you is this: do not assume you are the good soil. Do not assume you are the good soil. I cannot assume that I am the good soil. That just blows my mind. We can't assume that we're the good soil. We actually have to turn our attention to the state of the soil in our lives, and we have to pay attention to it, and we have to cultivate it. We have to make sure that it is not so compact that it can't even hear the word of God. We have to make sure that it isn't just lying fallow and letting whatever spring up just carelessly in our lives. We have to attend to the soil of our lives. We have to till it, and we have to make space for the roots of the message of the kingdom to grow deep. There's a phenomenal commentator on the parables of Jesus, and he has also just a killer name. His name is Klein Snodgrass. Anybody a little bit jealous? I know I am. And, there was a toss-up in our family whether our second-born son would be named Klein Snodgrass Kohler or not, and I did lose. So, Ezra, you're welcome. But this is what Klein Snodgrass says in relationship to this parable. He says, to be a disciple of the kingdom means hearing and remaining focused on the message of the kingdom in such a way that one is defined by it. So to be a disciple of the kingdom means hearing, not just hearing though, and remaining focused on the message of the kingdom in such a way that one is defined by it. Not defined by anything else, defined by it. It's receiving the seed of the message of the kingdom and cultivating a way of life that makes space for this plant to grow, because the reality of this passage is that your life and the kingdom life is in a symbiotic relationship. Right? You are not the kingdom. The kingdom is the rule and the reign of God. The fruit of the kingdom is the work of God. It is actually not your work. Your work is to make space for the roots of the kingdom to go down deep so that the plant can grow. And then our role is to till the soil around the plant so that other cares and concerns of life don't spring up, so that when the plant of the kingdom message, the kingdom of God, the rule and reign of him, of his rule and reign in our life, when that comes to full maturity, it produces a disproportionate crop. See, the reality is we don't produce the fruit, we till the soil. We can't produce fruit, but we can till soil. And what this means for us is you and I are not just doers of the kingdom. We're not just participants within the kingdom. We are carriers of the kingdom. We are those, when we cultivate a life, when we cultivate the soil of our life, we literally carry the symbiotic relationship of the kingdom with us. We carry it whether we're going to work or whether we're going out to coffee or whether we're getting together with friends or family or whether we're coming to church. We are carriers of that tiny little seed that grows up and produces a disproportionate amount. And what God says is, I am the one who produces the fruit. It always has been. When we talk about the fruit of the Spirit, so many different soil and seed and agrarian analogies from Jesus, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness. This is the fruit of the Spirit. It is the presence of God in our life. It is not us producing this fruit. It is the Holy Spirit producing this fruit. It is not us making things of the kingdom happen. It is us cultivating a life in which kingdom things can happen. And it is a fine distinction, but it's an important distinction. Because we can come and we can be bold in the name of Jesus and we can try to cast out demons or we can try to heal lepers, but the reality is we are just carriers. And the reality is, in both my life and your life, is sometimes we carry an immature seed. We carry maybe just the seed, or we're carrying the immature plant. And we're not yet sure what soil we find ourselves in because we have to keep tilling that soil. But when the kingdom, when the work of God in your life and in my life comes into maturity, it will bear a disproportionate crop to what was sown. This is the truth of the kingdom, that we are carriers and we are bearers of the kingdom. We bring the kingdom in its fragility. And we have to be careful with our lives so that the fragility of the plant can be fostered and God can do his work, because it is actually incredibly easy to snuff out. It is easy to wither, and it is easy to choke out by the cares and the concerns of the world if we aren't careful. You and I can't produce fruit, but we can till the soil. We can do that in a couple of simple ways. Really, really practical ways. And these things that we talk about, these simple, repeatable patterns in our lives, these simple practices, these simple rhythms, are not things that in and of themselves grow the plant of the kingdom in our lives, but they do make space for the kingdom in our life. It tills the soil of our life. Sometimes they're referred to as spiritual disciplines. These simple, repeatable patterns, these disciplines that train us and till and aerate the soil so that we can not only receive the word, we can be defined by the word as we hold it and its roots entangle deep within us. And when it comes to maturity, it produces the fruit. It is always God working, but he does it in us. And I promise you that God is infinitely more concerned with the work he does in you than the work he does through you. He's not impressed with our busyness. He's not impressed with our frantic activity, but he is honored by a life that cultivates the seed of the kingdom. And these simple, repeatable patterns, these spiritual disciplines, we're going to be talking about more in the coming months, how we practice them and how we integrate them into our life. These simple disciplines create the space. They break the hard soil. They remove the weeds and the thistles and the thorns. Richard Foster is a prolific author and pastor, has written so much on the spiritual life and on spiritual disciplines. He says this: a farmer is helpless to grow grain. All he can do is provide the right conditions for the growing of grain. He cultivates the ground, he plants the seed, he waters the plants, and then the natural forces of the earth take over and up comes the grain. This is the way it is with spiritual disciplines. By themselves, the spiritual disciplines can do nothing. They can only get us to the place where something can be done. The kingdom comes first in us. Spiritual disciplines, these simple, repeatable patterns in our lives, they can't do anything in and of themselves, but they do allow us in our lives, in our actual day-to-day living, to get to the place where something can be done. They till the soil of our lives, and it is only through the practice and the discipline and the shaping of our life by things like prayer and fasting and silence and solitude and celebration and confession that the soil of our lives is tilled and the plant is nurtured. It's only in those things that the soil can be healed up enough to actually be able to receive the message of the kingdom of God, and it can bear fruit in time. So what I would argue is that today maybe instead of looking at the more that we can do, maybe the answer today is for us to not. Maybe the answer is to not. Not do more, not say more, not fill space, and not fabricate some kind of experience with the Lord, but to simply be. Being always precedes doing. Who we are becoming is more important than what we do. The work God does in us always precedes and is more important than the work God does through us. This is the way of the kingdom. So maybe the answer for us is to not. In fact, Klein Snodgrass, my homeboy again, says this: the key to spiritual formation is the willingness to listen, the practice of the discipline of listening and responding appropriately to receive the word. So Klein, Mr. Snodgrass here, says that listening is actually an important function. Do you know what listening is? It's not doing. It's not saying, it's not speaking, it's just listening. It's being receptive. And it's only through being receptive that the kingdom presence can come in us. It gives birth to a plant that gives birth to a disproportionate crop. And Snodgrass defines it as listening. But to listen, we have to do a couple things. We have to make space in our life. We have to not just make this metaphorical space of tilling the soil, and that's a cool analogy and all, but we literally have to make space for God. I have talked with so many people and asked them about their spiritual lives, not here, but over the years of how they are developing their spiritual life. And it's like, well, I pray or I listen to an audio Bible. I have like a 10-minute commute to work, so that's when I do my time. Or you know what, I have a devotional and it gives me a verse and then it gives me somebody else's thoughts for 2 paragraphs and that's my time. Now that's okay. That's a really good starting point. If that's where you are as your starting point, that's awesome. Let's keep running in that direction together. But unfortunately, most of the time that I'm talking with people, I'm talking with seasoned veterans in the kingdom of God. I'm talking with people who have grown up in the church their entire life, and they know all of the answers. They know to read your Bible, they know to pray, and we still settle for crumbs from the table. If we are going to truly listen, if we are truly going to orient our lives as disciples and make space for the kingdom growth in us, we need more than a commute to work. Because what that is it's us fitting God in around our activity. That is solid soil 3 answer. I will fit God in around the thorns and the thistles of my life. He can have my commute to work because otherwise I'm just going to be streaming my Spotify playlist or a podcast. Some people reading, apparently. I've seen that on the road. I don't know how that works. Right? We fit things in around the cares and the concerns of our life, and oftentimes we fit God in around the cares and the concerns of our life. So to truly listen, we actually have to physically make space for God. And not just a little space, a lot of space. One of my favorite quotes from Martin Luther, one of the great church fathers, is he said, "I am too busy not to spend an hour a day in prayer. I am too busy not to spend an hour a day in prayer." There is so much frantic activity and so much stuff that God does want to do in the world that I need to dedicate a solid hour just to prayer, just to listening. Mother Teresa has gone on record. One of my favorite stories about Mother Teresa, she was interacting with one of my favorite writers, Henry Nouwen, and he had about an hour of time with Mother Teresa, and he was in a crisis of his vocation. He was trying to determine what the next thing he was supposed to do for work, and he had really good options. He was very high up, prestigious academic, and he wrote beautifully about the heart of God, and so he had a number of options, and he got to spend an hour with Mother Teresa, and he thought this is going to be a beautiful time to get some solid spiritual direction from a living saint. And so as he's talking with Mother Teresa, he says, "Hey, here's what I have going on. What do you think I should do?" And her answer is phenomenal. And the more I learn about Mother Teresa, it's just classic Teresa, right? So, and she says this to Henry Nouwen: "Adore the Lord 2 hours a day and never do anything you know to be wrong." He's like, "Okay, that's good, Mother Teresa, but what do I do with this job?" Adore the Lord 2 hours a day and never do anything you know to be wrong. In fact, we can learn more from Mother Teresa. There's an awesome story. She was interviewed for CBS by Dan Rather, and he took the opportunity to ask her a little bit about her spiritual life. And so he says, hey, Mother Teresa, I don't know if that's how he addressed her actually. Hey, MT, so when you are praying, what do you say to God? And her response, classic Teresa again, right? She says, "I listen." And so Dan Rather is like listening to that, and he's like, not exactly what I was really hoping for this interview. I have a lot of space to fill. I listen is not really going to cut it. So he turns the question a little bit, and he says, "Okay, then what does God say?" Again, right? You know it's coming. He listens. Okay, so when you pray, you listen, and God listens. And he's just sitting there, and he's sitting silent. He's a little dumbstruck, not really understanding what's going on. And Mother Teresa just continues then. After a moment of silence, she says, "And if you can't understand that, I can't explain it to you." Like if you don't get it, what it means to just be with somebody without having to produce anything, or without having to be somebody, or without having to be in the midst of chaos and busyness, then I can't explain it to you. Have you ever been in a relationship with somebody where you're just content to just be? You don't have to fill the space with words. You can just not do things together. Some of my favorite moments with Janine is this last summer, and even before that, we just got to sit on the beautiful beaches in the summertime on Lake Michigan and just take in a sunset. And during that time, we're just not doing anything. We are just together. Or sitting in our backyard on a sunny summer day for the 2 weeks that we had it in Michigan. And And just sitting there watching our kids play together. We're not talking, we're not doing anything, we're just together. And those are meaningful moments in my relationship. It's when you get to the point in relationship where you don't have to fill the time that you know that true intimacy is actually taking place. And the invitation to make space with God is to do more than just fill space with our words. It's to do more than just bring our requests and our petitions and see what we can get out of God, or to fabricate some kind of emotional high experience with him. It is to just listen. If we want to make space, just listen, and don't be surprised if God just listens back. Because there is a beauty in simply being with one another, a beauty in nothing is happening, we are just together. We exist together the way it was in the Trinity before all of creation, just existing together. That is the relationship that the Father invites us to, but we have to make space. We have to make significant space, not 5 minutes a day, not just our commute, but time dedicated to the Lord where we just sit and we just soak and we're like, you know what, if you want to say something, that's cool. Let's just sit. Let's just be together. Jesus said it this way: seek first the kingdom of heaven, and all of these things will be added to it. Right? All of those cares and concerns and things that we were worried about anyway, God knows you need those. You don't really have to worry about this. Just seek first the kingdom and his right. Just seek him. Seek his rule and reign. Seek who he is and his character. Just be with him, and all of those things will be added anyway. This is the space that we create. This is who we are called to be. We're called to adore the Lord 2 hours a day and never do anything we know to be wrong. We are called to be busy in the world, but we're going to be so busy that we need to set an hour aside to just pray. We need to set the time aside to where we just listen and he just listens. And not only is that what we need, it's also what the world needs. In a world of chaos and a world of constant hyperactivity, remember digital Babylon, this hyperactivity, always constantly accessible. What the world needs now in the midst of that is a person that is making space to cultivate a life where the kingdom can happen. You and I don't produce the kingdom, but we do carry it. We have to be good carriers. So let's attend to the soil of our own lives. I'm going to pray, and then we're going to continue to worship.